I would have never guessed. I thought you were just bringing my food." The poor girl's voice trembled, her face flushed with a mix of shame and disbelief. The CEO looked at her, his expression softening as he saw the raw hope that had replaced her desperation. "Some deliveries," the CEO said, his own voice thick with an unexpected emotion, "are more important than others. That job application on your table, consider this the final interview." The rumble of an engine, low and powerful, vibrated through the thin floorboards of her tiny apartment. Jessica Davis's head snapped up from the classifieds she had been circling for hours, her stomach clenching with a familiar, gnawing hunger. "That has to be him," she thought, her heart giving a hopeful leap. It was the first hot meal she would have had in 3 days, paid for with the last of her emergency cash. She had been checking the app compulsively, watching the little car icon crawl across the city map toward her rundown building. The sound of a heavy car door shutting with a solid, expensive thud echoed from the street below. It sounded different from the usual rattling sedans that frequented her neighborhood. "Maybe it's one of those premium delivery services," she rationalized, her hope overriding her skepticism. She grabbed her worn cardigan, pulling it tight around her thin frame as she unlocked her apartment door. The wood splintered around the old brass knob. The hallway was dimly lit and smelled of dust and boiled cabbage, a stark contrast to the clean, powerful sound of the vehicle outside. She practically ran down the 3 flights of stairs, her worn sneakers silent on the linoleum steps, propelled by an urgency that was about more than just food. It was about a small moment of relief in a life that had become a constant struggle. Before we continue with the story, be sure to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments. We love learning about our viewers. Now let's get back to the story. Pushing through the heavy front door of the building, she was met with a blast of cool city air. And there, parked at the curb, was not a beat-up hatchback with a glowing sign on top, but a sleek, black luxury sedan, so polished it reflected the gray sky like a dark mirror. A man stood beside it, his back to her, adjusting the cuff of a perfectly tailored suit jacket. He was tall and broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of wealth and authority that seemed utterly out of place on her block. For a moment, Jessica froze, confusion warring with her hunger. This couldn't be her delivery. It was a mistake. But then the man turned slightly, holding a phone in his hand as if checking an address, and her desperation latched onto the only possible explanation. He must work for that new high-end corporate lunch service Erica Adams told me about. They probably send them in fancy cars to impress clients. The thought, however flimsy, was all she needed. She took a hesitant step forward, her hand clutching the $10 bill she had ready for a tip. It felt impossibly small and flimsy now. The man looked up from his phone, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated building entrance before landing on her. He had a strong jaw and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in her frayed cardigan and anxious expression in a single, swift glance. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, surprise perhaps, or confusion. Jessica's own face grew warm under his inspection. She felt a sudden sharp awareness of her worn-out jeans and the faded color of her top. But the gnawing in her stomach was a more powerful force than her pride. She had already paid online. This food was hers. She had to believe this was her delivery. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she forced a polite, if slightly shaky, smile and walked toward him, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. He did not smile back, but his expression remained neutral, waiting. The sheer expense of his suit, the quiet confidence in his stance, was more intimidating than any overt disapproval. He represented a world so far removed from hers, a world of comfort and security she could only dream of. "Hi, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice coming out higher than she intended. "I'm in apartment 3B. I saw you pull up. Did you have any trouble finding the place?" The man's eyebrows drew together in a slight frown, a small line appearing between them. He lowered his phone, giving her his full attention. The intensity of his focus made her want to shrink back, to apologize for even existing in his line of sight. But she pressed on, driven by the image of the warm container of food she imagined he was holding for her. "The buzzer system is broken. I should have mentioned that in the notes. I hope you didn't have to wait out here for long." I came down as fast as I could. She gestured vaguely back toward the crumbling facade of her building, as if to offer it as an excuse for her own appearance, for the entire situation. He followed her gesture, his eyes lingering on a crack that snaked its way up the brickwork next to the door. When his gaze returned to her, it was still unreadable, a blank mask of polite inquiry that gave nothing away about his thoughts. The silence stretched for a beat too long, and Jessica's fragile confidence began to crumble into pure anxiety. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice a deep, smooth baritone that was as luxurious as his car. It wasn't a question of not hearing her, but of not understanding her. The single word hung in the air between them, dismantling her entire assumption piece by piece. Her smile faltered. "Oh no, I've made a mistake. A horrible, embarrassing mistake." Her mind raced, trying to find a way to back out of this situation gracefully. But how could she? She had run out of her building and accosted a wealthy stranger, babbling about a food delivery. A hot flush of shame crept up her neck, far more intense than the hunger that had driven her out here. She wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole. He wasn't a delivery driver. He was just a man in a suit who had parked on her street, and she had made a complete fool of herself. Her cheeks burned, and she could feel the sting of humiliated tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to turn and run, to hide back in her apartment, and never come out again. He must have seen the panic and mortification on her face, because his expression shifted subtly. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften just a fraction, a hint of something other than confusion entering his eyes. "You're from 3B, he asked, his tone less formal now, more direct. Jessica could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. She clutched the $10 bill in her hand, the paper now crumpled and damp with her sweat. She felt stripped bare under his gaze, her poverty and her desperation laid out for this powerful stranger to see. It was a new kind of low. He probably thinks I'm a beggar, she thought. The idea a fresh wave of humiliation. She had to say something, to explain herself, to salvage a shred of her dignity, but what could she possibly say? "Sorry, I'm just so hungry, I mistook you for the pizza guy." The thought was so pathetic it almost made her laugh, a hysterical broken sound that caught in her throat as a sob. Just as she was about to stammer out an apology and retreat in defeat, he spoke again, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "I was just about to come up," he said, gesturing with his phone toward the building. "I own this building. Or rather, my company does. We just acquired it." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Owner? This man, who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, owned her crumbling, neglected apartment building. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. All the times she had complained to the faceless management company about the leaking pipes, the broken heating, the mice, she had been complaining to an entity owned by the man standing right in front of her. Her mind struggled to process the information. He wasn't just a random stranger, he was her new landlord. A landlord who had just witnessed her in a moment of peak desperation. The power imbalance, already vast, suddenly felt infinite and insurmountable. She stared at him, speechless. Her problems with the apartment, her job search, her hunger, it all felt small and insignificant in the face of this revelation. He was likely here for a reason, an inspection perhaps, or some formal business she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And she had interrupted him, accosted him on the street like a lunatic. The $10 bill in her hand felt like it was burning a hole in her palm. She wanted to hide it, to pretend it was never there. The man's eyes, however, were not focused on the money. They were looking at her face, his expression now one of keen analytical curiosity. It was as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. The puzzle of why a tenant in his newly acquired property would run out into the street to greet him as if he were delivering a pizza. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant wail of a siren and the rustle of a plastic bag blowing down the desolate sidewalk. "You were expecting a delivery?" he asked, his voice gentle, coaxing. He wasn't mocking her, he seemed genuinely curious. Jessica found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Yes, food." She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes, focusing instead on the perfectly polished tip of his leather shoe. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her poverty dissected by this man of immense wealth and influence. He had likely never known a day of hunger in his life. He wouldn't understand the kind of desperation that leads to such a humiliating mistake. He would see her as irresponsible, pathetic, a problem tenant in a problem building he now had to deal with. Her chance for a hot meal was gone, replaced by the cold dread of potential eviction. What if he thinks I can't pay my rent? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, even worse than the hunger had been. Her entire future in this apartment, her last remaining piece of stability, felt balanced on a knife's edge, dependent on the whim of the man she had just mistaken for her delivery driver. He took a step closer, and she flinched involuntarily, her mind bracing for a lecture, a dismissal, a threat. The polished leather of his shoes squeaked softly on the gritty pavement. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a chasm of class and circumstance that felt impossible to cross. The distant hum of city traffic seemed to fade away, and all she could hear was the frantic thumping of her own heart. He stopped just a few feet from her, his shadow falling over her, blocking out the pale afternoon light. Her breath caught in her chest as he raised his hand, not to dismiss her, but as if to say something more. The moment stretched, thick with suspense. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, unable to look up and face what she was sure would be a look of pity or disdain. The cliffhanger was no longer about a meal, it was about her entire life. Her mind screamed, just say something, anything. Her frantic thoughts were cut short, as her stomach betrayed her with a loud, unmistakable growl that echoed in the tense silence between the slum and the CEO. The sound, so mortifyingly loud in the quiet space between them, made Jessica's entire body freeze. If there had been any ambiguity about her situation before, it was gone now. The growl was a primal announcement of her hunger, a raw, embarrassing truth that hung in the air. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could simply dematerialize. She expected him to laugh, or at the very least, to see a smirk of condescending amusement on his face when she dared to look up. But when she forced her eyes open, his expression was not one of mockery. It was something else entirely, a flicker of profound understanding, a deep-seated empathy that startled her. It was as if her hunger was not a joke to him, but a piece of data he was logging with serious consideration. He said nothing for a long moment, his gaze holding hers, and in that gaze, she saw not a landlord or a CEO, but just a man witnessing another person's struggle. The judgment she had braced for never came. Instead, his entire demeanor shifted from one of detached observation to quiet, focused intent. "I see," he said softly, and the two words were filled with a weight that belied their simplicity. He pulled his phone from his pocket again, his thumb moving swiftly across the screen. Jessica watched, confused, as he typed. Was he making a note about her, reporting her to some internal department for problematic tenants? Her anxiety spiked again. He's going to have me evicted. He thinks I'm a mess, that I can't afford this place. But his next words completely blindsided her. "What did you order?" he asked, his eyes still on his phone, his tone now startlingly practical. The question was so unexpected, so contrary to all her fears, that she could only stare at him blankly. "What?" she managed to squeak out, her mind struggling to catch up. He looked up from his phone, his expression patient. "The food you were waiting for. What was it?" He was serious. He was actually asking her about the meal she had been dreaming of for the past 72 hours. She stammered, thrown completely off balance. Just a bowl of pho. From the Vietnamese place down on King Street. The admission felt silly, confessing her humble craving to a man who probably dined at the most exclusive restaurants in the city. He nodded once, a quick, decisive gesture, and his thumb resumed its rapid tapping on the screen. "King Street Noodle House," he confirmed without looking up. Jessica nodded dumbly, mesmerized by the strange turn of events. He was ordering her food. The CEO of the company that owned her building was standing on the sidewalk, ordering her lunch on his phone. The situation was so surreal, she wondered if she had fallen asleep at her kitchen table and this was all a hunger-induced hallucination. A few more taps, and he slid the phone back into the pocket of his expensive suit. "I've ordered it for you," he stated simply. "And a few other things. It will be here in about 15 minutes. I've asked them to rush it." He spoke with the casual authority of a man who was used to having his requests met without question. Jessica's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and burgeoning gratitude. You didn't have to do that," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "I can pay you back. As soon as I get paid. I'm looking for a job right now. I have some interviews." She started rambling, desperate to assure him she wasn't a charity case, that she had a plan, that she wasn't just some freeloader. He held up a hand, gently cutting her off. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice kind but firm. Then his eyes drifted from her face to the apartment building behind her, his expression turning serious again. "You said the buzzer is broken?" he asked. She nodded. "And the heating in your unit," he continued, his gaze sharp and focused. "Does it work properly?" The shift in topic was jarring. It works sometimes," she admitted hesitantly. "It clicks on and off. It was off all last night." He absorbed this information with a grim tightness around his mouth. He was no longer just a man who had bought her lunch. He was a proprietor assessing his property, and he did not seem pleased with what he was hearing. "Let's go inside," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a request. He started walking toward the entrance, expecting her to follow. Numbly she did, her mind still reeling. She held the door open for him, and he stepped into the dingy, poorly lit lobby. Inside, the building's flaws were even more apparent. The faint light from the single working bulb flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was stale, and the once grand tile floor was cracked and stained. The CEO took it all in, his gaze missing nothing. He ran a hand along the dusty railing of the staircase, his expression growing more severe with every detail he observed. Jessica felt a strange mix of emotions. She was embarrassed by her surroundings, yet vindicated that he was finally seeing the conditions she and the other tenants endured. This was not an abstract line on a financial statement for him anymore. It was real. He was breathing the same musty air, seeing the same neglect she lived with every day. They walked up the 3 flights of stairs in silence. Jessica was hyper-aware of his presence behind her, the sound of his expensive shoes on the worn steps. When they reached her floor, she fumbled with the keys to her apartment, her hands shaking slightly. As she unlocked the door, it swung inward to reveal her small, one-room living space. It was sparse, but impeccably clean. A threadbare sofa was pushed against one wall, a small wobbly table served as her desk and dining area, and a single mattress lay on the floor in the corner. Her entire life was contained in this small, cramped box, and on the table, laid out with neat precision, was her resume, a pen resting beside a list of potential jobs she had circled in the newspaper. The CEO's eyes swept the room, taking in the neatness, the evidence of her struggle, and finally, his gaze landed on the resume, sitting on the table. He took a step into the room, his large frame seeming to shrink the already small space. He was no longer just looking at the building, he was looking at her life. He walked over to the small table without a word, and picked up her resume. Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt completely exposed, her professional history and personal aspirations now in the hands of the man who held the key to her housing. She had half a mind to snatch it back, but she was frozen in place, watching him. He read the single page carefully, his expression unreadable. He scanned her work history, a series of retail and administrative jobs, each one ending when the company downsized or closed. He noted her education, a 2-year college degree in business administration, completed with honors. He spent a long time reading the skills section, his eyes lingering on phrases like highly organized, proficient in all major office software, and excellent communication skills. The silence in the small room was absolute. Jessica held her breath, waiting for his verdict. What must he be thinking? That she was a failure, that her resume was pathetic compared to the people he surely hired for his own company. He placed the resume back on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Then he turned to face her. His eyes were no longer just empathetic, they were calculating, assessing. He looked from the resume back to her face, a new kind of intensity in his gaze. It was the look of a businessman who had just identified a potential asset. "You've been looking for a while," he stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, finding her voice. "For about 6 months," she admitted. "It's been difficult." He nodded slowly, his mind clearly working. He paced the small space between her table and the door, his footsteps making the floorboards creak. He seemed to have forgotten about the building, the broken heating, the food he had ordered for her. His focus was entirely on her now, on the piece of paper that summarized her professional life. He was connecting dots she couldn't see, formulating a plan she couldn't begin to guess. The power dynamic had shifted again. He was no longer just a landlord or a benefactor. He was a CEO, and he was looking at her as if she were a potential investment. He stopped pacing and turned to her, his decision apparently made. The air in the room felt charged, electric with possibility. The last 9 minutes had been a roller coaster of shame, fear, relief, and confusion. She had gone from starving and desperate to being the object of intense focus for one of the most powerful men she had ever met. Her future, which had seemed so bleak just moments ago, now felt like a complete unknown. He had seen her at her absolute lowest, and now he had seen her professional qualifications. What would he do with that information? Would he offer her a pitying word of encouragement and leave? Or was this leading to something else entirely? The look in his eyes suggested it was the latter. He opened his mouth to speak, the words seeming to hang on the precipice of changing her life forever. "Jessica," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it, in his deep, commanding voice, made her stand up a little straighter. He looked directly into her eyes, his gaze unwavering and serious. "This building is the least of my concerns right now." He paused, letting the statement sink in, creating a moment of unbearable tension. "That resume," he gestured toward the table, "is far more interesting." He took a breath, and Jessica felt as if her entire world was holding its breath with him. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner was the only sound, a low, constant thrum beneath the weight of his impending words. The cliffhanger was no longer about a meal or her apartment. It was about her entire future, her potential, the possibility of a life she had long since given up on. He looked from the worn resume on her table back to her hopeful eyes and said, "The reason I'm here, it's not what you think. My name is Alan Grant. I'm the CEO of Grant Enterprises." The name hit her like a tidal wave. Grant Enterprises. The name was plastered on half the new construction sites in the city. They were a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporation with interests in real estate, tech, and finance. It wasn't just some local property management company. It was a corporate empire. And this man, Alan Grant, was the king of that empire. Jessica's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful CEO from the news with the man standing in her shabby apartment, the man who had bought her lunch, the man who was holding her future in his hands. The misunderstanding was so much bigger than she had imagined. She hadn't just mistaken a landlord for a delivery driver. She had mistaken one of the city's most influential figures for a man who brought people noodles. The sheer colossal scale of her blunder made her feel lightheaded. "CEO," she whispered, the word tasting foreign and absurd on her tongue. "You're the Alan Grant." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes never leaving hers. He was watching her reaction, gauging her. "I didn't come here to inspect the plumbing, Jessica," he continued, his voice calm and steady, cutting through her shock. "My company is launching a new urban renewal initiative. We acquire underperforming residential properties in neglected neighborhoods. The plan is to renovate them completely, create safe, modern, affordable housing, and revitalize the community." He gestured around her small apartment. "This building is our pilot project. I came to see the starting point for myself, to understand the reality of the situation before we begin." His explanation contextualized everything, but it did little to calm her racing heart. She was living in the pilot project for a billionaire's new pet project, and she, in her hunger and desperation, had become the unofficial, deeply embarrassing face of that project. The humiliation was so profound, she felt a dizzying urge to laugh or cry. She did neither, standing frozen as he continued to speak, his words reshaping her world minute by minute. "What I see here," he said, his gaze sweeping the room again, but this time with a different kind of focus, "is a problem. Broken heating, crumbling infrastructure. That will all be fixed. My team will be here tomorrow to begin assessments, and all tenants will be temporarily relocated to one of our corporate suites, at our expense, until the renovations are complete. The offer was staggering. A corporate suite. The thought was beyond anything she could have imagined. The immediate, crushing weight of her living situation was being lifted, just like that. But he wasn't finished. His eyes landed back on the resume on her table. But I also see something else. I see potential being wasted. He took a step closer, his voice lowering slightly, becoming more personal. I read your resume. You have a degree in business administration. You have experience. You're organized. He tapped the neatly circled ads in the newspaper. And you are clearly driven. It's not easy to keep fighting this hard for 6 months. A warmth spread through Jessica's chest, chasing away the cold dread. He wasn't pitying her, he was complimenting her. He saw her struggle, not as a failing, but as a sign of strength. He saw her, "My new initiative," he said, his tone shifting back to the decisive cadence of a CEO, "needs a coordinator. Someone on the ground who understands the community, someone who can liaise with the tenants, manage schedules, and oversee the day-to-day logistics of the project. It needs someone who is organized, who is a good communicator, and who has a personal stake in seeing it succeed." He paused, and the unspoken question hung in the air between them, thick with possibility. Jessica's breath hitched. She knew what was coming, but it seemed too fantastic to be true. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not in a rundown apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. He can't be serious, she thought, her own hope feeling like a dangerous, fragile thing. The job pays $65,000 a year, with full benefits, Alan stated, the number seeming to echo in the small room. It was more money than she had ever made, more than she had even allowed herself to dream of in her most optimistic moments. It's a demanding role, but I believe you can do it. He looked at her, his expression expectant. I am offering you the position of project coordinator for the Grant Urban Renewal Initiative. Your first project will be this building, your own home. He extended his hand. What do you say, Jessica? The offer was real. The handshake was waiting. The job, a career, a future, a way out, was right there, encapsulated in the space between her and his outstretched hand. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of shame or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable relief. The fight was over. She had won. She reached out and took his hand, her small, trembling hand enveloped in his warm, firm grip. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion, but clear and certain. Yes, thank you. I won't let you down. A genuine smile finally broke through his serious facade, lighting up his face. I know you won't, he said. Welcome to the team. At that exact moment, a knock came at the door. Not the weak, uncertain knock of a neighbor, but a sharp, confident rap. Alan released her hand and opened the door to reveal a delivery driver, a real one this time, holding several large, steaming bags of food. The fragrant aroma of ginger, star anise, and rich broth filled the small apartment, a scent that now smelled like the beginning of the rest of her life. The delivery was no longer a symbol of her desperation, but a celebration of her new beginning. She had mistaken a CEO for a delivery man, and in the space of 9 minutes, he had delivered her from a life of struggle and hired her to help him deliver that same hope to others. Alan paid the driver and brought the bags to her small table, clearing a space next to her resume. He unpacked the containers, the pho she had craved, but also fresh spring rolls, chicken sauté, and sweet iced coffee. It was a feast. They sat, the CEO and his newest employee, in the small, worn-out apartment that was about to become her first official project. As she took her first bite of the hot, savory noodles, the warmth spreading through her was more than just the end of hunger. It was the feeling of hope restored, of dignity reclaimed. Alan Grant watched her, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. He had come to inspect a building, a problem on a balance sheet. He left having found a solution, and more importantly, an asset he never expected. He had seen past the poverty and the frayed cardigan to the resilient, capable woman underneath. Jessica started her new job the very next day. She walked into the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Grant Enterprises, not as a visitor, but as an employee. She excelled in her role. her first-hand experience giving her an empathy and understanding that no other coordinator could have had. She ensured the renovations on her building were done with care and respect for the tenants, who all moved back into beautiful, safe, and still affordable homes. The project was a resounding success, becoming a model for urban renewal across the country. Jessica Davis, the girl who had once mistaken the CEO for a delivery man, was now an integral part of his most praised initiative. She never forgot the hunger or the desperation of that day, using it as a driving force to ensure that no one in her community would feel that hopeless again. Her life had been changed by a simple misunderstanding, proving that sometimes the most important deliveries don't come in a takeout bag, but in the form of an unexpected opportunity.